thank you very much, everyone for joining us today. It is an honor and pleasure to introduce you to Tyson Yunkaporta. And I won't take too much time because he has a lot to say and a lot to share. So Tyson, please, take the stage and let's start.
No problems. Look, and I'd be more than happy to just be responsive to the in the Q&A as well. I prefer to have a bit of a yarn than just straight monologue. There's nothing worse than that. So how's all going? It's just it's a real honor and pleasure to be here. Right now I'm located a place called Naarm, which it's also called Melbourne. Temporarily for a while it'll be called Melbourne, but it is Naarm, and it's always sort of been a swamp, and I'm sure it'll return back to that. It's sort of been drained and covered with concrete, most of it. I'm on Bunurong country right now, to the southeast there, and it's you can sort of imagine what things were like, but it is difficult. I've spent most of my life living in remote places and rural and remote and in the bush and all that sort of thing. My family is about 3,000 kilometers to the north of here. I belong to the Apalech Clan up there. I've got affiliations and ancestral connections in the south, in South Australia and elsewhere around, and lots of affiliations, cultural affiliations all over the continent. I've spent a lot of time moving around, quite an itinerant life. And it's, for me, it's all about the stories that you take with you kind of as currency, because our traditional economies are kind of like that. When you come into other places, you share those stories of, who and you connect up, people who haven't seen each other for a long time or whatever, and you tell stories about that and share news, and that's kind of a currency, and people look after you there. And that's an economy that's still in place. Most of the places where I go in Australia, there's, I know I don't have to worry too much about whether I'll be able to get something to eat or have somewhere to sleep. And it's kind of like an Indigenous Airbnb. That's kind of lovely that sort of still exists so vibrantly here. So I am spending some time in the city. It has been a difficult adjustment to move into city life. And I think, the countryside is rapidly being emptied out all around the world. And to me, I think that's the big takeaway from today is, the best thing you can do for the environment is to occupy your ecological niche within it. The land needs people. We're supposed to be in it. Our role is that of a custodial species. That's our ecological niche. We're supposed to look after those systems, and in order to do that, we need to be embedded within it, and our lifestyles need to be embedded within it. The difficulty with that is the financialization of land. It's not necessarily the economic activity, like, yes, that's a big one, but it's more the finance side. So at the point when land became capital, so something that could be leveraged against debt, something that could be mortgaged, this became a problem, because your capital, in order to be priced, it needs to be limitable and excludable. And that means you need to move the people out of that system. You need to be able to enclose that system and keep it separate from everything else. So every parcel of land is an enclosure that kind of prevents the free movement of people, but also all kinds of species. and waters and energy and information that's supposed to go dynamically throughout that natural system in a bioregion. Every ecosystem moves a couple of 100 meters every year. The land is also moving, and we're supposed to move with it. But we have these sedentary sort of communities now, and things like cities that we have to struggle for upkeep. Those at the bottom of the heap of this sort of caste system that's required to keep a growth-based economy alive, because laws of supply and demand, there has to be more demand than supply. There has to be a lot of people missing out in order for economies to keep growing. Instead of being a stable, thriving economy, it has to grow every year or it'll collapse. And that's because of that financial layer. And that starts with land as capital. And I think a lot of people would imagine that land, real estate is not a huge part of the financial system, but it is. It's 2/3 of all capital is land. It's owned by not very many people. And I think most of the interventions we see in terms of the environment, but also public health interventions, particularly in third world countries, particularly the philanthropic ones, or where philanthropics are involved, you really need to look deeper into that and see that really that's a way for the super wealthy to get a foot in the door in those places, backed by the state, like things like AFRICOM and all these sorts of things, kind of just do horrendous things to make sure that the resources can keep flooding in, and that the entropy and violence that's created from these clean technological spaces you live in, all of that is outsourced to other peoples, other lands elsewhere. The decay of your landscape after you've built your city, you need to keep sourcing lands further and further afield. So you've got everybody's coming up with all these weird conspiracy theories about Bill Gates, and about everything really, but you don't need the conspiracy theories. Like, the actual things that are happening are bad enough, so you have these billionaires buying up the water rights, and buying up the land in all these places, and that's kind of terrifying, particularly the buying up of the water rights, etc., etc., etc. And what does this all have to do with the environment? What does this all have to do with climate change? I mean, it has everything, everything to do with climate change. You really need to, I guess, through an Indigenous lens, but you can apply a systems thinking or complexity theory lens to it as well. When you look at what goes on in the world, and particularly climate change and all the causes and all the effects, you need to be quite non-linear in how you look at it. You can't just look at one problem, one aspect of it, like carbon, and then like, oh, here's a tree that sucks up 10 times more carbon than anything else. We're going to lobby to, we're going to march, we're going to do this to force the government to plant out heaps of these trees, and maybe you get it done, maybe you won't. Seems like a battle worth fighting. You win, and then what? Those trees go in, but they're not the right trees for that place. They're not supposed to be there, and you're planting them all, and then it's just basically a plantation of those trees, creating another resource down the track. And I mean, it prevents the soil from doing what the soil needs to do in that place. It just becomes a big carbon sink where there's, nothing going on, no real life, no real system. And it's kind of like a wasteland of trees, a desert of trees. They're growing close by side each other. There are no people in there caring for that place. There's no megafauna in there. There's not much of anything. It's just a empty, dead place. We see this happening everywhere. There's places that I went to 30 years ago where the water was just thick with fish, and the trees were heavy with fruit, and the air was so thick with birds that you couldn't hear the person talking next to you. And you come back 30 years later in the same place, it's like there's tourists there taking photos because it's a forest and it's beautiful, but it's dead. And as climate change happens, we're all looking for the big things. We're looking for the hurricanes, we're looking for the cyclones, we're looking for the extreme weather events, we're looking for the huge natural disaster, bushfire, everything like that. We're looking for that. But we're not looking into the micro. We don't realize that there's little molds, little bacteria, little things that with just a tiny little raise in the temperature, that they're thriving beyond where they're supposed to be thriving. And the trees haven't adjusted to that yet. So, so I'm a carver. Traditionally, I carve like traditional weapons and tools and things like that. And I have noticed that, an increasing number of trees that you cut into, over the last decade or so, they're just crumbling inside. They're all eaten out. They're just sort of standing, these kind of cylinders with an inch of living wood around the outside of them. Just, it looks like a tree, but it's not a tree anymore. It's a dead man walking. It's a dying entity. There's all of these things going on. Those trees, all the things in that system, they require us, to be there with an eye on these things. They require us to be caring for these things and to be finding non-linear solutions to all of these problems, which is a meta crisis. And it's not just in the land, that crisis. There is a stack and the land is at the bottom. And there are other stacks on top. There are financial layers, economic layers, political layers, all kinds of things going on there in these landscapes that we're forced to inhabit. And they all need our attention. They all need to be changed and cared for in that way. It's it is really tricky, but I guess we can make ourselves feel better with these direct actions where we see a problem, we propose a solution that may or may not be grounded in science or careful observation over time, and when we march for it and we make it happen, and we save the elephants here from poachers, and then all of a sudden 2 more species over the next couple of months die out over there because the poachers are forced to go elsewhere and take the white rhinos out instead. These things keep happening. You need you need a lot more complexity in how you do things. And look, I tell you, your personal consumer choices, like whether or not you go to Starbucks individually, that doesn't matter. That's not an ecological project. That's not even a political project. That's just a personal project. You're condemning and calling out, maybe, I don't know, the Koch brothers or whatever in your tweets. That's not an ecological project. That's a personal branding project. What can you do? And look, the greatest, I believe the greatest things you could do, an actual ecological project would be probably have nothing to do with the land initially, and nothing to do with planting trees or looking after the environment directly or lobbying this and or that. It would be about making sure, getting people together and creating networks that ensure that every person living in your bioregion is able to access affordable food that's sourced directly in your region. It would be about cutting out those massive supply chains and making sure there's something in place that's also looking out for your future and the security of your region for the inevitable, massive upheavals and catastrophes that'll be, dogging us through the next decade or two and then beyond. So, these are the kinds of actions that need to be taken. And I guess once you're more focused on your local and on your bioregion, then you can start to notice what's going on in the landscape. You notice the seasons, you notice the changes, you notice the movement of different species there. And once you notice those patterns, then you can start to see when, a problem before it becomes a disaster. And, you're able to see something like, well, the fish are dying off up there in the river. And so I think within 12 months, there's going to be a big bushfire. You can see those connections of those things, so you know what you need to do. And look, they need us. All the entities in this land, they need us in there looking after things. And I mean, they need our, just even our physical waste. These are ecosystems that have evolved to need that waste. There are trees that are missing your caca and your, all the rest, the things that your body produces. Particularly, they might have even evolved to need the things that you're bringing up from the coast, to eat, the fish bones that you're bringing up from the river and taking in and eating around those trees and then leaving that waste there. I know that's not like, wow, no, you have to compost that or something, don't you? Or I don't know. The land tends to compost stuff pretty well. A lot of the things that we're encouraged to do that we think are green are actually the opposite of that. I don't know if anybody remembers. So in Australia, we had Keep Australia Beautiful. In America, there was Keep America Beautiful. These sound like, anti-litter campaigns, and they were anti-litter campaigns. And that seems like a green thing to do, and teach people to put their rubbish in the bin instead of, like on that TV show Mad Men, when you see them just throwing all their bottles into the bushes or whatever, dumping out their picnic blanket on the ground and walking away. But no, that's not what that was. That was all sponsored by the people who invented disposable packaging. And before that, everybody had containers, everybody had bottles, everybody had jars, and you would have someone come by and fill those things, or you would go to a place where you would fill them with the things you needed, and you keep those jars for your life, those containers. And your grandmother probably did that, all of you. A lot of you, even me, I remember milk bottles. Does anyone else remember milk bottles when you were a kid? These things were real. And then I also remember the ads on TV, Keep Australia Beautiful, which were basically training videos to teach us to move away from those behaviors and move into the disposal of rubbish to landfill, and teach us how to use these disposable packaging things and chuck them. So, that's all where we're at. And I guess everything you could look at from that frame. I don't know. I was talking to my spouse before, and she's telling me about this. I don't know. You heard about Fiat, that vehicle company? My spouse, she's doing her PhD in Indigenous blockchain tech, and it's pretty interesting. So she's always got her eye on this stuff. But it's quite ironic, but Fiat is giving away cryptocurrency incentives for eco-friendly behavior. You install their app on your phone, and it tracks your ecological behavior, and it rewards you with cryptocurrency. I find it ironic that a company called Fiat is dealing in crypto. Anyway, if you're into crypto, you'll get that joke, and it's really funny. Yeah, but I don't know. So what you end up with is they're basically reward vouchers in the end. These cryptocurrencies, and you can spend them at only in certain places. You can spend it on Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Spotify, places like this, and that's going to save the planet. Look, your consumer choices are not going to save the planet. They might make you feel better, Austerity, your austerity is not going to save the planet. You enforcing austerity on everybody else, or that's not going to save the planet. I mean, austerity is coming anyway for everybody. It's already here and has been here for, a long time for most of the people in the world. And if you're lucky enough to live in a place where that's not happening, that won't be a reality for long. I mean, you can see the way things are being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed more and more and more. There's never been more money in the world. There's never been more wealth in the world, and there's never been more inequality. And what's equality got to do with climate change? I guess if you get these systems right, and if I don't know, if you're able to disrupt somehow these activities of the powerful, then that would all be sorted out. However, how realistic is it? Genuinely, I don't think there's ever been a time in history where the people have been less powerful. That even the worst emperors in Rome, they were still terrified of the Roman people all the time and had to keep them placated all the time. Even when they did that right and they gave them all the bread and circuses, every now and then they just rise up and kill half the Senate. These things happen. The people have never been less powerful than they are now. And I'm really struggling to see a lot of direct action sort of solutions to these things. But we do need to be keeping our attention on the right places and seeing the early warning signs and responding and coming up with very creative and very thoughtful ways to tackle these problems. And we can't keep charging off at linear solutions. And I guess you need to talk to the smartest people. Look, I read an article this morning that was, a lot of research went into this. It was a big research project, and it was good research, they had good data, they had good outcomes, and it was true, but it was basically looking at, it was a climate, project, climate change project, awesome. But it was looking at, how climate anxiety is a symptom of white fragility, and and it's true, and that's great. But maybe that's not the most important place to have our attention right now. If you're doing climate studies, and I'd recommend that if you're having a climate science thing that you're, I don't know, I'm probably talking to people right now who are actual climate scientists. I'm not. I'm just a random black fellow from Australia who's not a climatologist and is not really across all the best things. I kind of outsource my opinions on these things to people who actually spend their lives studying these things, and I think it's good to make sure you're listening to those people all the time. And I don't know, you can get a bit of energy from I don't know, listening to like a little girl who's crying at Davos or whatever, but I think there's probably a lot sort of better knowledge that we need to be looking at as well, than from people like me and people like a crying girl and people like this. So I'd really encourage you to to look at expertise. The only thing I have to offer is an Indigenous lens that asks a few more questions and sort of, I don't know, tries to broaden things out more holistically. Because at the moment, even the experts are focusing on, one thing. So the Australian government, it has its experts, and so it's decided that, gas is, if we focus on gas as our fossil fuel now, that'll reduce carbon emissions, because we're focused just on carbon, right? Like that's even the worst greenhouse gas. So instead we're going to burn and release all this gas instead. I mean, the problem with that, from what I could see, is that that goes into the atmosphere. It prevents methane from breaking down, so the methane stays up there for longer. And that to me is a bigger problem. Methane in a lot of ways is worse than the carbon. I mean, there are a lot of gases we need to worry about, but there are a lot of other things going on as well, beyond what those gas emissions are. Like I said, it's a meta crisis and there's a lot of parts to it. And I think the best thing that most of us can do is to be in the local and find ways to reduce reliance on these ridiculous supply chains that are, heavily subsidized at every point. So it costs like a fortune to get one apple to you, but that's all subsidized, and it's basically, making sure that all the oil to power those ships is to, pick it in this place after shipping the labor from that place over to here, and then pick it there, and then ship it to the other side of the world for some other poor people to polish those apples, and then ship it back to wherever the hell you're going to sell it. These are ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, clunky supply chains that I don't think people were really aware of until COVID. We weren't aware of how complicated they were, and they weren't aware of how fragile they were. But they are both of those things. So, I don't know. I really struggle, I guess, with a lot of this stuff. I don't know. How do you all feel about it? I imagine we got some Q's and some. I'll see if there's any A's. But like I said, you might as well ask a crying, like, teenage girl. She's probably going to have more answers than me, in fact. But in the end, I think we need to make sure we're getting the best minds working on these things in less siloed ways. I mean, if we can Operation Warp Speed this one, that would be handy, because that's some good collaboration there. Okay, someone asking about that IK Systems Lab. Sweet. Yeah, well, look, so the IK Systems Lab is just starting up now. It'll probably take the rest of the year to get it up and running. But basically, this is about applying Indigenous knowledge systems using a complexity lens to solve some of the wicked problems in the world. So it's not about studying or reporting on Indigenous conditions or, describing Indigenous knowledge or anything like that. Although we all enjoy reading that stuff. It's more about trying to deploy the inherent genius in our culture for, being able to view things holistically, to see if we can't have another run at the data and pick up some things that other people might have missed. So we've got a few different things on the boil there. But this is multidisciplinary, and we kind of follow wherever the story takes us. So yes, in education, but I personally, I've chucked a couple of decades down education, more than a couple of decades, and I don't think that's where the change begins. I don't have a lot of respect for the idea of awareness or changing attitudes and things like that. I know that everybody thinks that's the cause of inequality, and that's the cause of bad behaviors that are, triggering this Anthropocene, is that we're all just these dumb, stupid, terrible beings that are doomed to destroy themselves. But I don't think that's where those things are. And I think the more we can identify, where the problems are starting and where the pressure points and basins of attraction are, that we could, make one interesting change that will cause a bit of a domino effect. I think that's the kind of thing. And we need to harness the complexity and the dynamism of, complex adaptive systems. We need to harness that thing so that can do the heavy lifting for us, because we haven't got a lot of time to go through and tinker a solution to every tiny little piece of the problem. And that's seldom effective anyway, doing things that way. How necessary to the nature of mankind? I'm reading a question here. Couldn't it do far better without us? Couldn't wildlife? No, That's a myth. And even the concept of wild is a myth. We refer to wild country as, that doesn't have humans in it, as sick country. We're supposed to be there. It's really important that we don't hate ourselves. If you hate yourself, then you hate your nature and you hate the creation that produced you. You are part of the landscape. So to hate your species, and to think of your species as something that's terrible and ruining everything, I think for a start, it's inaccurate and it's not helpful, but it also continues to separate you from your ecological niche and from the land that you're supposed to be embedded in. There's an entanglement between you and place that's sacred and that shows you how to be. All of us have that patterning within us. And it doesn't take long to return to it. Doesn't take long at all. So yeah, no, wild places, that's a myth. The idea that those are healthy environments. They really aren't, unless they're places that have never ever had humans in them, and then you probably just leave those alone. But there aren't many of those places. We are supposed to be there. These landscapes have evolved to have us in them, and we're a vital part of it. And the place can't be healthy without us. The wild places in Australia very quickly get and in the United States and everywhere else, even Greenland, the wild places there, they very quickly become overgrown. The animals can't move through it properly. It stagnates. The energy and information can't exchange throughout that system very well. It gets choked out. It becomes entropic, and usually there's a big wildfire, or you get dieback. Dieback's a big problem. You see those in a lot of wild places in the far north where the people no longer have access to because they're on mining leases and stuff like that. You get dieback that, yes, is associated with the toxins from the mines, but it's also associated with just that land missing us. We're supposed to be there. Another question. When modern science is so focused on empirical evidence, data, and proof, how can Indigenous communities get scientists and politicians to listen to thousands of years passed down observed knowledge and understanding about climate, the environment? How can non-Indigenous people support these efforts? Yeah, well, I think here's the thing. I think the most important thing is focusing on the processes of Indigenous knowledge. So you're looking at Indigenous knowledge systems as processes of inquiry, and there are, and I don't know, I guess you just deploy these and then show how they're useful. So take anything and take a second run at the data and see if you can find something that particularly, I don't know. So you get your Indigenous team of researchers together, and then you go and find, a study that's had variable results, where the results haven't been replicable over time, so that it's, there's no evidence that blah, blah, blah. There's no evidence that fish oil has a beneficial effect on the human body, for example, because the results are so variable from trial to trial. In one trial, it's completely healing people's kidneys, and in the next trial, it's nothing's happening. So you bring an Indigenous team in to replicate that experiment, and you might find that we have a few variables that you didn't consider, like time and place, variables in our method of inquiry. So we're intensely aware of the seasonality of beneficial effects of fish fat. So the fish fat is only medicinal when you see the yellow flowers in the wattle trees. And, when you see those yellow flowers, that salmon fat, for example, is medicinal, and that's when it's beneficial. So I guess if you're harvesting your fish oil just randomly at any time of the year, assuming that all fish oil is just one substance, and you're not thinking about the place where you're harvesting it from, the stage in the migration of those fish, if you're not thinking about the season and all that sort of thing, then you're leaving out the most important variables. So right there, it's just an example of, if you're applying Indigenous knowledge, it's not like just, the nice story of, how the fish got its tail and, here's how you make a spear and here's how we catch the fish, which is always entertaining and fascinating and all the rest. But I think, I mean, that's the reason, for a kind of lack of respect for Indigenous knowledge, or a lack of an ability to sort of see it and deploy it effectively in the world. Another question: what are some examples of practices from your own culture which could be applied more widely towards mitigating climate change? Well, I think one of the best carbon sinks you can have is grass. But this is just from my point of view, because my country is savanna, so I'm prejudiced towards savanna. So luckily in our way, you look at lots of different stories and lots of different points of view before you decide on a course of action, because usually the truth lies in the aggregate of that. So if you were just listening to me, then you would think this was the most important thing, but on its own, it wouldn't be. So don't take this away as a definite solution or anything. But the one that I would throw into the mix would be recovering as much grasslands as possible, and doing the counterintuitive thing of actually burning that grasslands off. And you're thinking, but isn't that just a bunch of smoke and carbon going up into the sky? Well, I mean, the growth that you stimulate in that, and the action of burning it off, actually increases the rate of carbon sequestering of those grasslands. So I've had someone say to me before, but weren't Aboriginal people like the biggest carbon emitters ever because of all the burning off of the grasslands they did? And I'm like, oh, okay, man. That's one point of view. So for me, grasslands is a really big one. But then for that, you need to have large herbivores moving over that as well and eating it. As I said earlier, these things are in a stack. And I mean, I guess as long as you make sure that the bottom of the stack is good, then you're all good. And the bottom of the stack isn't the grass. The bottom of the stack is the soil that's underneath. Most of the topsoil in the world is gone. Most of it is gone. And that's a huge problem. So, so you need that healthy soil. You need the rhizome, the mycelia, everything in there to be quite healthy. When you've got that bottom of the evolutionary stack happening, then you've got more. You're definitely going to have grass there. And if you have grass, then you're going to have herbivores. They're going to migrate in from somewhere else, or they're going to evolve gradually over deep time there, one way or another. And the higher you go in the stack, the more things you can take out without completely destroying the system's ability to regenerate itself. If you take out the bottom of the stack, then that's no good. I guess if you're looking to take action against power, probably calling out their bad behavior is that's like attacking things at the top of the stack. You might, if you're really lucky, get some sacrificial lamb from the middle management, bloody cancelled and fired or whatever. Yay, a win for the planet. It's not a win for the planet. You need to get smarter than that. Figure out what is the bottom of the evolutionary stack, for that corporation. And then you look at that and go, well, hang on, it's not just a corporation. It's a network of corporations and lobby groups and think tanks and all kinds of things. So you look for it, you investigate, and you find what is the rug that you can yank out from under its feet. Are you even capable of doing that? That would be where you want to direct your action if you want to have that direct action. So, it's the same thing, with your environment. But then I said before, there's other layers of the stack over there now, and they're financial layers and they're, political layers and all kinds of things. And these things are in a kind of new topography, and you've got to have your eye on all of it. You have your eye on all of it, and you have to observe very keenly. You have to see the patterns. You have to see the cycles. You have to be able to see these things. The patterns are important because, you can do predictive modeling from those patterns. I guess that's, I don't know. So, a predictive modeling project, that's rebuilding a predictive modeling system using Indigenous knowledge is one of the things I'm interested in doing with the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab. It's that kind of exciting things. It's how to, I don't know, instead of taking direct action for, I don't know. So an example from the other day was, looking at a particular organization, and they're trying to close the gender gap there. And so I had them looking at the Uber data that showed the gender gap, with Uber drivers, and the analysis of that showed there's a gender gap there between male and female drivers, because males are more likely to participate in high risk behaviors. They're going to drive to the wrong side of the tracks, and they're going to pick up dodgy customers and stuff like that. So there's these, it's incentivized. High risk behavior is incentivized, and it pretty much is throughout this marketplace. And as long as high risk behaviors are incentivized, well, you're going to have ecological damage occurring. You're going to have tighter cycles of boom and bust, and they're going to be, massive failures and, terrible consequences and cataclysms coming out of that high risk behavior. So, I suggested that your best way to tackle the gender gap would be to disrupt the system of perverse incentives in the organization that encourages high risk behaviors, and actually install an incentives program for hiring and for promotion and for pay rises that rewards low risk behavior. And in time, the demographics of your organization will change so that there are more women represented in that organization. Because not every woman is a low risk person, not every man is a high risk person, but in the aggregate over time, that's what will come out. And you would not have to put up one cringe-worthy diversity poster on the wall that's directly targeting, here's our targets, and we're going to hire this many women, we're going to promote this many women, and why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? Well, it isn't working because it's a direct intervention. And any direct intervention that you do from outside of a system or the top of a system, because you've arranged it into a hierarchy, any direct intervention you do from there, you're not in that system. And you're actually preventing the system from rearranging itself and self-organizing in ways that produce the more productive outcomes. Now I've got another long question here. Isn't a system of representation that's first important to solve? Isn't is? I don't know what that means. Election in 2020, Greens, popular vote, 10% parliamentary. Yeah, I don't have very much. I don't have very much faith in representative democracy to achieve anything at all. You don't have an option, in a two-party system to vote for anybody who's actually going to change anything. As an Aboriginal person in Australia, you don't have the option of voting for a party that is going to, say no to the military intervention into our communities, and the compulsory acquisition of land and massive land grab, and the suspension of the Racial Discrimination Act to do horrendous things. You don't have an option to vote for that. And it's the same with land. There's no option that you can vote for that is going to take the steps that are needed to slow down this destruction, let alone reverse it. I don't think voting, and I don't think representative democracy is something, is a place to put all of your energy into if you're looking for actual change in things. You need to see what's lying around, and you need to start at the grassroots and see what you can change around you. You can seek funding, you can start organizations, you can do foundations and grants and all this sort of stuff, and that's lovely. But I think have a look around your neighborhood and see what's lying around that you can use, see what your resources are, see what your relationships are, and what people can do right there, and start right there, and then start networking out further and further. Every meaningful and sustainable governance model that is aligned with a landscape in a way that those things can dance together infinitely, rather than ending each other. Every proper system of governance and proper economy, it starts with that basic unit. It's like a dyad, and it's in you, and it's this sort of this twoism, where you are this fabulous individual, that's true, and you are completely autonomous. However, you are bound up within a collective of other autonomous people, but you're limited, by the mores of that group, and you have iron bonds of bounds of binds of obligation, around you within that that little collective that you belong to, that clan or family. That's an autonomous collective, but it's also networked in and restrained by a larger collective of other autonomous collectives. And then all that group within your bioregion there, that's also networked in with similar large autonomous groups and bioregions all the way around. And then, et cetera, out. And it sort of goes out fractally. And that's the governance, a very simple governance model. In Australia, you can see it replicated in a fern leaf, in the fractal patterns of that fern leaf, the basic pattern that keeps, replicating from the micro to the macro. And so what we ended up with is a continental system of common law that had many diverse expressions and ways of doing things, but was networked together in that way, of that dichotomy existing together. And it's not a dialectic. It's not two things in opposition to each other to produce a third amazing thing. And it's not a competitive structure either, where one story has to come out on top and win and be the dominant narrative. It's not a two-party structure. It's not like that. Those things are supposed to be in a constant dance of tension and balance together. And this is how a sustainable governance model works. It's how a sustainable economic system works. It's how a sustainable ecology works. And it's quite a simple pattern, but it starts, in your local place, and it starts in the micro riser of the soil of your life. And, and it sort of fractalizes out from there. So you have to start with that, the governance of yourself, and the governance of your family, the governance of your community, and then out to your local governance, and then regional governance and beyond. And you sort of, that's the kind of work that needs to be done. That's the kind of work that's going to need to be done to make our communities, agile enough, not fragile, but agile enough to be able to survive, a lot of the cataclysms that are coming. But it's also going to produce the cultures of transition that are going to be needed during the 1,000-year cleanup that our children will be beginning for us. So, for me, all of my activism is focused on leaving them the tools that they're going to need to begin that cleanup and to build the cultures of transition that will be needed, and to be agile enough. And those tools are not physical tools. These things are temporary. These computers, everything else. There's only a few decades worth of the materials that are needed for this tech. It's not something that's going to keep multiplying exponentially because it looks good on a graph. That's an abstract. The reality is, the land imposes limits. Every civilization, maximum shelf life of 1,000 years when it starts going the wrong way, before, mummy smacks, and mummy will smack. That's what nature does. The law is in the land, and 1,000 years is a blink of blink of an eye to the land, and the land will sort you out and will end your civilization for you. You can keep trying to pivot and pivot and pivot to squeeze a few more decades out. And I think there's a lot of hope in technology for being able to solve all these problems. But I'm sorry, but it's kind of the problem. All the rare earth metals in your machine that, produced, tons of radioactive waste that needs to be stored for, 1,000 years. Somehow, no one's actually figured out how to store radioactive waste yet for that long. I don't know if they actually have even storage facilities that would last more than a couple of centuries at the moment before it leaks. So, these are things we're going to have to contend with. So the tech is not going to save us there. Our networks, on social platforms and stuff are not going to save us. Our collective outrage is not going to save us. Our personal consumer choices are not going to save us. We're going to have to get a bit more creative than that. What's my position on the idea that nature renews itself? Oh, yeah, it does. And like I said, you've got that evolutionary stack, and the evolutionary stack will always throw up a custodial species. So if we don't manage to maintain ourselves as the custodial species, the land will throw up another one and try a different model. Won't Indigenous knowledge always have a struggle to effectively fight for its place against other forms of conventional knowledge acquisition? Well, yeah, I guess for as long as it's Indigenous knowledge. I mean, just being Indigenous is about being, part of an extractive relation. There shouldn't be Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. Indigenous is just how people are, and it's how most people were until very, very recently. And there's just a temporary blip of domesticated humans, who've been forced into that way of being, but that Indigenous patterning is still in them. And I guess, at the stage inevitably where everybody returns to that way of being in, that doesn't mean ooga booga run out in animal skins. No, it just means a way of being that is, profoundly in your context and profoundly located, and taking up your ecological niche and your role as a custodian. I guess when everybody's doing that, then there won't be the word Indigenous anymore. There'll be no need to call it anything but human. And I guess that's when the struggle will end. But as long as we have to call ourselves Indigenous in order to be in relation, sort of oppositional framework to bloody settlers and colonists and, the imperial powers that are destroying everything, then, yeah, well, of course we're going to be marginal, because we're sitting, we own all of the lands from which you're extracting the things you need to be able to have Zoom meetings. You're about to enter a 10-year depression, global depression, and most places are going to have to dig their way out of that by increasing oil production and resource production. That's going to have to happen on the land, and you're going to have to go further and further afield to get it, and you're going to have to destroy a lot more Indigenous communities to do that. So yeah, there is going to be an oppositional relation here. Still, we're here reaching out and offering to help, which I think is probably our greatest sort of weakness. It doesn't help to keep doing that. It doesn't help us anyway. Now, shouldn't Indigenous communities put up their own political candidates for election? Yeah, but then what? It's like the same problem I said before. It's nice to be represented, and that's a good symbolic thing, and those voices there get people thinking. But at the same time, I genuinely don't believe in the power of and administration to really do much at all. I mean, I feel like they pretty much just do what they're told. You must know about the lobby groups, the think tanks, the big, things like Council on Foreign Relations and all those things. And then the huge asset management funds that are just worth quadrillions. This is power that you can't imagine in your tiny little, pathetic governments. That basically, they've got a little bit of wriggle room on policy, but most of that is just around, what brand the culture is going to take. Is it going to be one that's, mummy culture or daddy will smack culture? Is it going to be one that makes nice noises about equality while inequality increases? Or is it going to be one that makes nasty noises about equality while inequality increases? Either way, the condition remains the same and will worsen, and it doesn't matter, You can put a CEO, in place with a turban and go, look, isn't that great? But that corporation's still going to do what corporations do. There might be some feel good stuff come out of it, but this is just to take our eye off the ball, I believe.
Now, Tyson, there's just a couple of minutes left. So would you like to wrap up with a positive message or answer one more question? Your choice.
So, the positive message is that I'm fortunate enough to be affiliated with, to belong to a culture that's ancient enough to have in our oral history, in our record, the stories of many, many apocalypses. We've been through heaps of them, and an apocalypse isn't the end of the world. It's just a changing of your world. And you need to belong to an adaptive culture, you need to have an adaptive lifestyle that's able to be mobile if it needs to. So the most important thing you can prep is your relationships, your relationships with place, your relationships with your community around you. That's the best way to prep. And that'll always get you through, because it's amazing what we can do together. We've been through that many apocalypses and we survived them all. And, you'll survive this one too. It's only an apocalypse, like, don't panic too much. We will, as long as you're remaining adaptive and you're not clinging to the life that was, and you're ready to step into the life that is becoming, then you'll be right, I reckon.
Tyson, thank you very much for your wonderful insight. And then I know that there's much more that, many more questions that people have. And, there is never enough time. I think we might have to have you again at another festival and another session. But yeah, and somebody asked about the recording. It will be available on our YouTube channel. So, yeah. And
my request would be that you get some sort of climatologist, maybe.
Actually, that would be a good session.
I don't know what I'm talking about. Please don't, it's like, that disclaimer at the start of a YouTube video. This is not financial advice. It's kind of like that. This is not climate advice. Don't do what I say. I don't know. It's just some ideas.
Well, we'll take up on that one, and we'll organize one for the next festival. So, yeah. Thank you very much once again, Tyson. Hopefully, we'll have you again very soon. And yes, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. And for the people that register, it will be sent as a link to you as well, to your email addresses. So you have it handy. So thank you very much once again.
All right. Thank you.